friends. I want to welcome you to the Demilitarized Zone, a project of Storyburg, Pittsburgh. The focus here is to create a space where we can all experience sharing a space and with folks who have experiences that we might not otherwise hear if we weren't in this room. So my name is Leanne Younger. I'm the pastor of the church that runs this community center. And as far as I'm concerned, this is one of the most important things that we do. So I'm really grateful for your presence here and really looking forward to hearing from our storytellers. My job here is just to kind of help us move along, maybe tell a few secrets about the different storytellers today. But first, I want to read the rules of engagement. Some of you have probably read them, and if you've been to a demilitarized zone storytelling project or performance, you already know them, but I think it doesn't hurt to be reminded. So the first is check your weapons at the door. And when we say weapons, we mean metaphorical, figurative, virtual, actual. So no groans, no cheers, eye rolling or insults. This tends to be a very friendly crowd, but we like to put that stuff out there. The next is to enter as an individual who is prepared to respectfully listen to the story of another individual. Our ultimate dream here, hope here, is that we have people who might stand on opposite sides of the divide and tell their story, and we all listen. We all learn a little bit more about humanity as we listen. The next request of the rules of engagement are listen well and understand that as storytellers, they speak for themselves alone. The storyteller is coming to tell their story. They've been coached to, agreed to be coached to ensure that. One of the most important things I want to make sure I say is that respectful attention does not imply agreement. So you may hear something that makes you uncomfortable, but today what we are here to do is listen. It's okay if we don't agree. We are here to be together. Lastly, what you do with what you hear is up to you. I'd like to begin by inviting our first storyteller to come forward, Lynette Bynum. And I don't want to steal Lynette's thunder, but I will just say this when asked to give me a little preview of her story. What she said was, through trauma, illness, death, and depression, I rise. We've asked all the storytellers to tell us a nickname they either have or may have had as a child. And so Nettie, right? Lynette, where are you? All right, Nettie. All right, Nettie, come on down. Yes.
I'm very nervous. God, all I want is 1 week of being healthy. That's all. Amen. This was my prayer for 17 years of my life. See, I have systemic lupus, erythematosus. Lupus, SLE for short, if you are unfamiliar with this illness. SLE is an autoimmune disease where the immune system attacks its own tissues, causing inflammation and tissue damage to any organ it chooses. Joints, skin, brain, lungs, kidneys, and blood vessels. When I was a very young child, it presented itself in my lungs constantly. I would always have pneumonia until I was about 8 years old. At that point, my lungs would constantly inflame with pleurisy. I was an extremely active child. I was a tomboy. I climbed trees with the boys. I didn't want baby dolls. I wanted the next trophy or baseball, basketball, fast pitch softball, and volleyball. My only problem was that I would be on crutches every summer because my knees would hurt so bad, and we didn't know why. Constantly being sick on crutches in the house, watching the soap operas with my grandma, I was slowly sliding down the hill of depression. My mom was never around. My grandma took us off of her because my stepfather would constantly beat on her while he was in his addiction. I was raped in her custody by my friend's brother and was sexually assaulted by my uncle, whom I loved dearly. All of this took place during the first 11 years of my life. At the age of 13, I was pulling my hair out because I had no outlet. We couldn't talk about how we felt back then. I bottled all of this up. In fact, I held it in and became angry. I stopped smiling. I hung in gangs and wore baggy blue pants and a blue flannel. I thought I finally had a family who really loved me and understands me. That's pretty much what gangs consist of, a bunch of angry, broken kids who have no idea how to cope with their trauma. After years of so many near-death experiences and watching all of my friends gunned down, I wanted out. Everyone was gone. They were all killed. My middle school teacher heard me sing in the choir. He told me he was sending me to audition at Kappa, the Performing Arts High School. He saved my life. I auditioned, I got in, and I fell in love with opera, jazz, contemporary music, and I loved performing. I didn't realize it was therapy for me. Music became life. Music made me smile. Music was everything. I graduated with high honors and was ready to audition for the Pittsburgh Opera, but I got so sick and didn't know why. Found out that I was pregnant, so I had to put that on hold. Pregnancy was rough because of my illness, and my body would not tolerate food. But I had a beautiful baby girl who I named Symphony. This is the moment when I realized what true love was. To fast forward, my health seemed to be okay until I turned 22. At 22, I had my first heart attack. I could still remember hearing my heart pounding painfully out of my chest. This is when I was diagnosed. After that, I seemed to be in the hospital more than I was at home for the rest of my life until now. I have had another heart attack, a stroke, cancer of the gallbladder, my thyroid and tumors removed due to a goiter, pleurisy, stents placed in my pancreatic duct and my bile duct, diverticulitis, which is infected intestines. Because I was sodomized, I cannot use my muscles to have bowel movements. Neuropathy, 24-hour pain, joint pain, and the list goes on. I'm always in pain. I was on pain meds the majority of my life, and after so much pain, I self-medicated. Nothing helped the pain. I became addicted. I lost so much trying to find anything to take the pain away. I lost myself completely. But when I decided enough was enough, I went to rehab. Now, don't think I wasn't afraid to let the pain meds go. I was extremely paranoid. There was no way I could live without a pill. I had already tried going cold turkey off of them and actually flatlined. And God knows withdrawal will kill me. I got through it. I pushed and I fought so hard. I wanted a real life of peace. I wanted my relationship with God. By this time, I had 4 kids and a grandbaby. I needed them all, and they needed me more. I surrendered to God. I gave him charge over my life. I did everything necessary to build a better Lynette. I found love and a family of women just like me who helped to keep each other up. I found Miss Shar, Sunflower House. I have a wonderful support system. I constantly work on building myself up. I work the 12 steps of Narcotics Anonymous, and I practice spiritual principles. There are some things I learned about God. I learned that he loves me, and I am the apple of his eye. He never, ever left me. He has been with me all this time. He has kept me protected from so much. There was freedom that came to my heart because I was restricted by pain, fear, and grief. God wanted a different version of me, and that's what I gave him. My name is Lynette Danielle Bannon. My story began with a broken, young, insecure young lady who couldn't wait to die. But it ended with a confident, self-determined, courageous, compassionate, extremely strong woman who is a true and beautiful warrior, a woman who reflects on what she has been through and how far she has come daily. A grateful, sassy, resilient woman of God, blessed with the gift of new life. Proud to say boldly that I'm an unfazed lupus warrior, and I am a truly grateful recovering addict. Thank you. You want me to?
Oh, yeah. You gotta say one. You gotta give us 2 bars. Go ahead, Nettie.
Okay.
Come on, Nettie.
Shattered, but I'm not broken. Wounded, but time will heal. Heavy the load, the cross I bear. Lonely the road I try, I dare. Shaken, but here I stand. Weary, still I press on. Long are the nights, the tears I cry. Dark are the days, no sun in the sky. Yet still I rise.
All right. That was some. Thank you, Lynette. Well, everyone take a deep breath because that was some power. Soak that in. Mickey McDonough is our next speaker, and Mickey's story deals with religious trauma and forgiveness. And Mickey has a couple of nicknames here, Mickey, Mick, and then Calf. I don't know, you might have to explain that one at some point. But first, come on up and tell us your story. Let's welcome Mickey.
It's Calf because my real name is Kathleen.
Wow.
Yeah. Lynette, I am just in awe of you. Like, I wish I had your faith and confidence, honestly. Thank you. That was so powerful. Okay, so in a slightly similar way to Lynette, my story is not one episode that's, before, after, your life's different, something happens, and then it becomes changed again. Mine is also cumulative, like kind of over 18 years. And mine has to do with growing up Catholic. And when I first thought about this, I thought, oh, most of my memories of growing up Catholic are actually kind of terrifying. And I really did not want to offend anybody, but I thought, this is something I really need to be honest about. But keep in mind that I just turned 75 yesterday. So thank you, Mom and Dad. Thanks. And so I grew up in the 1950s when the Catholic Church was, really, our whole country was very conservative at that time. And I'm quite aware that the church of the 1950s is very different from the church today. I have, nieces and nephews who just couldn't believe some of these stories. But nonetheless, I grew up in the Catholic Church in the 1950s. And I do remember spending a great deal of time being very much afraid that I was going to go to hell. So just for example, I had a recurring nightmare that I was being chased by the devil. I don't know how many kids have that, but I did. And then there was this episode, your first Holy Communion is just such a holy spiritual thing, and you're not allowed to touch the host, but the host sticks onto the top of your palate. So the only way I could get it down was to scrape it off with my finger, and I'm like, I'm definitely going to hell because we're not allowed to touch the body of Christ, right? So, yeah, I have a lot of stories. I'll tell a couple of them. Not all of them are horrible. Some of them are neutral, and a couple of them are actually funny. So I'll do my best to balance this a little bit. But my first memory of being Catholic was when I was probably about 6. And at about 6:55 at night, my mother would yell out the door, "You have to come in now, the rosary is on." So religiously, I would go in the house and kneel in front of the radio because, believe it or not, at 7 o'clock at night, the rosary was on the radio every night. It took about 15 minutes. That's how much it took to say the Apostles' Creed and the required numbers of Our Fathers and Hail Marys. And the whole time, I'm just not being able to concentrate at all on the prayers because it was cutting into playtime. And you know, we had to come back in when the street lights went off. So, you know, I was feeling very torn about that. I want to go out and play, but on the other hand, I felt kind of guilty because I was not honoring God at the same time. So there's people shaking their heads. Some people must have grown up Catholic here. But yeah, so jump forward a couple of years. I think I was probably about 11. My brother Ed, my sibling right under me, was about 8. And I remember being in church, and the priest's sermon was just going on and on and on about how people were suffering throughout the world. Like there was trauma and devastation everywhere, and people were suffering in so many places. And all of a sudden, I heard my brother yell out, "Stop suffering, take buffering." I know. So enough of you remember that I don't even know if it's still sold. It was a very popular aspirin at the time. But I do remember hearing kind of restrained chuckles from the congregation. I don't think my parents or the priest really appreciated that. But, and then I cannot forget my dad, who was an usher in the church, and he was a member of the Knights of Columbus. So he was a very good practicing Catholic, but he also had a wicked sense of humor. And back in the 50s, the whole Mass was in Latin. So my dad had a certain way of making some of the chants more accessible. So there was one Latin retort, and I don't remember Latin at all, but it sounded something like "Leve utum laborium Dei," which my dad translated to us as "Leave us off on Labor Day." Thought that was pretty funny. So beginning in 1st grade, there were the daily lessons with the Baltimore Catechism, which is a children's version of the basic teachings of the Catholic faith. This version consisted of kind of rote memorization of answers to very important questions. And Pam and I had a discussion about this because she's also a recovering Catholic. And she won awards for her memorization skills. I did not. But the question I remember, the only question I remember is, why did God make you? And I knew the answer was, God made me to, I have to read it now. I thought I remembered it. God made me to know him, to love him, to serve him in this world, and to be happy with him forever in the next. So I remember thinking that one way I could show God that I loved him was to say morning prayers every day. So that was a promise I made to myself. So jump forward a little bit. It was shortly after my first communion. I had not yet turned 8 years old and had only made my Holy Communion a couple months prior and successfully overcame that first confession where you're petrified. Yes, I disobeyed my parents. I got into fights with my brothers. My parents always said I was sassy. So I was petrified that the priest would not give me absolution, which that's a Catholic terminology, but it really means forgiveness. But he did after, telling me I had to say X number of Our Fathers and Hail Marys. So I did get forgiven. So like I said, a month or so later, I'm getting ready to make my second confession. And after thinking about those, usual transgressions, I was going to, again, confess those kind of same things because, what's a 7-year-old going to do but, get in fights and disobey their parents. But I also realized that I had made a promise to God that I would say my morning prayers. And I forgot a couple of times. I think it was 3 times. I forgot. So I told the priest my usual transgressions and then said, I forgot to say my morning prayers 3 times. And the priest, there was silence, and then the priest said, when you do not say your morning prayers, it is like slapping Jesus on the face while he is hanging on the cross. I will not forgive you. Yeah, that was pretty heavy. So devastation is just, that's, I thought I was going to go to hell immediately, and I was hyperventilating. I lived about 5 minutes from my grandmother's house where a lot of times we ate lunch. I remember rushing there. My mom was there because my brother Bill, I think, was an infant at the time, and she was visiting my grandmother. And I rushed in and told them what happened, and I'm sure they were shocked and stunned. But they said, just everything's going to be okay. Just calm down. What we're going to do is tomorrow we will take you to another church, and you can tell another priest what happened. And I said, okay. And that's exactly what I did. We went to another church, went into the confessional, told another priest what had transpired, and there was dead silence. And I heard, who is this priest? Thank you. I'm thinking, I'm not going to go to hell. So I guess, at least temporarily, that particular problem was resolved for me. But I remember, might have been about 15, 20 years ago, reading in the newspaper that unforgiving, nasty priest was actually one accused of molesting children. He was a pedophile. And the Catholic Church covered it up, right? All right, so this particular horrifying experience in itself, because I was so young, I really wasn't doubting my faith at that point at 7 or 8 years old, but it's something clearly I never forgot. And years went by and many other events happened that seemed to me to be kind of contradictory to the church's teachings. Things just kind of started piling up for me. So maybe that particular incident in retrospect might have been the first nail in the coffin. I'm not sure. But I do know by the time I graduated from high school, that coffin was definitely nailed shut. And I never went to church again on Sunday. When I left for college, that was it. I never went to Sunday Mass. So am I scarred for life? I don't think so. We Catholics who grew up during the 50s prefer to refer to ourselves as recovering Catholics. Have I totally given up the Catholic faith? I'm not sure. I do know over the last 50 years or so, because I have gone to the required wedding masses and funeral masses, and it's very obvious to me that the church has progressed dramatically. In fact, people can actually take the host and put it in their own mouths with their fingers now. So we would have definitely gone to hell for that. And I know my nieces and nephews, and even my sister, who's about 10 years younger than me, had very different experiences going through elementary school and high school. Maybe if I were younger and had grown up in a more supportive Catholic church, I might be a good Catholic. I'll never know. It's also struck me that even if I wanted to be a good practicing Catholic, maybe I wouldn't be able to. I'm divorced. the Catholic Church does not recognize divorce, like the partner has to die. So the only way you can get married again or be involved again is you have to get an annulment that is granted by an ecclesiastical tribunal. So I never did remarry, but honestly, I have lived in sin several times in the past. My ex-husband is still alive. I have questions because I am no longer living in sin. Can I practice Catholicism? I suppose I should do some investigating about that, but I have not and probably won't. So I kind of think that says something. All right, so my stories. Thank you.
We are at the demilitarized zone about nothing if we aren't about transparency and honesty. So thank you so much for your open story. No, and it should be said sometimes, because I introduced myself as a pastor, it should be said that this is not a program designed by the church or anything like that. So, but I hope some of you heard things that you resonate with, the journey, the struggle, the heartache. That's what we're here for, is to connect our hearts to other humans together. And so thank you. Our next storyteller is, I'm going to call you an international man of mystery, because on the page where I'm supposed to have a whole bunch of information, I got nothing. So join me in welcoming Bill Gandy as he comes forward.
I didn't mean to be so mysterious, but I had a lot to do. I really did. Okay, so my story tonight is going to be a little different. It's about the shine. Anybody ever heard about that? If you're black, you might know about the shine. It's sort of when you have some powers of, let's say, extra powers that other people might not have. And it's usually down south where this happens. My family is from down south, well, at least my mother's side. And she used to sit around and tell us stories all the time. And she told us some pretty wild ones. And this one story is about a woman named Miss Liza that she came across before. Now, Miss Liza used to live in their neighborhood in Phoenix City, Alabama. And she used to like my Uncle Walker Lee Butler. For some reason, when you're black, you have to say the whole name. Walker Lee Butler or Uncle Johnny Walker or something like that. You know what I'm saying? So she used to like my Uncle Walker Lee Butler. And he didn't like her, you know. And at night in his bedroom, a lot of times they would hear him say, "Stop, get off me. You know, let me go." You know what I'm saying? And this happened several times. And they used to think he was kind of touched or something like that. But one time my mother came across Miss Liza in a strange way. And in the South, they had this superstition that if a pregnant woman did your hair, it would fall out. Okay? And so my mother was pregnant, and she did Miss Liza's hair. And Miss Liza came up to her and said, "You never told me you were pregnant. You know, now my hair is going to fall out." And my mother said she didn't know. She didn't think it was a big deal. And then Miss Liza looked at her and said, "I'm going to get you." And so that night, my mother goes to sleep. And she sees Miss Liza on top of her chest, choking her, almost to where she could not breathe, you know. And I mean, it chokes me up too when I hear this, because it was crazy stories we heard as a kid. But so she was choking her. And so the next day she sees Miss Liza, And she says to her, well, first of all, Miss Liza looks at her and smiles. And then she says, I know that was you last night, Miss Liza. She said, I'm going to get you. Now, my mother don't know anything. We didn't know anything about any type of voodoo or any type of powers like that. So my mother decided she'd take a bunch of flour and put it around her house and stuff like that. And she went to Miss Liza and she told her, if you come across my doorstep, your neck will break. So, for some reason, this worked, and Miss Liza never touched her. And I just want you to know there's a lot of mysterious things that are going on in the world that a lot of people may not truly understand, that may be cultural and may have come from Africa and other places such as that. But when people tell you some strange stuff, sometimes you might want to believe it, because you never know what's up. So I'm going to keep it short. That's it for me, y'all.
Thanks, Bill. We're gonna pause and take a brief intermission.
Christine Smith
Oh, wait, I ain't turning mine.
from Central Pennsylvania, I believe it says. Where I began in Central Pennsylvania in the 1960s, considers herself a humanist. If I'm saying that right, I love that. A stop along the way, many stops along the way. I believe it says practicing social worker and a manager. And then where I am, searching, and I can't read that word, but it says religious beliefs. Let's give Christine 2 claps. Emmett, happy, jubilant, loose, stop along the way, somewhat confused, and where I am now, very confused. I love that. Wherever you are, Emmett, 2 claps. Then we got Ross. It says West Newton, and it says a stop along the way, Prague, is that how you say that? Prague, I knew that. Vietnam, Japan. Where I am now, Pittsburgh. 2 claps for Ross. Carla Arnold, Pittsburgh, Allegheny Hospital. I was born in Shadyside, just so y'all know. That was the very beginning. North Side, 1958. I love it. Hey, shout out to Troy Hill. A stop along the way. It says, I was a missionary in, I think it says, I can't pronounce that word, Malawi? Yeah. Malawi, Africa, for a month. I love that. Where I am now, I'm deciding when in 2024 I will retire. Me too. I'm trying to decide too. 2 claps for Carla. And then we have Lynette. Lost. It says where I began. Lost, blind, afraid, unsure. I stop along the way, wanting change, seeking something different, needing a shift. Where I am now, and we're going to all say this. Everybody say free. Free. We free now, y'all. Thank you.
Okay, we've got 3 more storytellers. Our next storyteller is Sydney. Let me say it for the camera. Our next storyteller is Sydney Daniel. And Sydney's coming to tell us a story about weakness, strength, and growth. Sydney wants us to believe there's no nicknames, and we'll leave it at that, but I bet that's not true. Let's welcome Sydney.
Thank you, everyone. So my story about where I come from, it comes from weakness, strength, and growth. My story begins from a long line of women that chose whatever the reason to not have a male counterpart in their life. However, I yearned for it and welcomed it. Fast forward, I graduated from high school, completed 1 year of college. I completed that year when I met the father of my child. He was a football player. His dreams were to be a football star. I decided to go to the military. I left school. We maintained a long distance relationship, and I would visit as often as I could. I was then stationed in Misawa, Japan, and of course, I found out I was pregnant. I returned home to give birth to my son. Things were great between us. I was home for about 12 weeks and had to return to active duty. Cried every day, went to therapy. I begged this man to come live with me, but he decided not to, and I was told I have a career in football. He told me to come home and that his parents bought a house for us, and that was the end of the story. I met with my commanding officer about going home, but I did not want to end my military career. My son's father was still in school. My son lived between his paternal grandparents and my mother. In all of this, I received documentation from the Allegheny County Courts and Allegheny County Child Support Enforcement for custody and financial care for my son. Mind you, all of my money went to my child and his father, even though we were not married and I was away. In all of this, I felt guilty for leaving my son. I didn't consider a lot of things due to my own insecurity, lack of knowledge, lack of care for myself. I felt I was used. I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. He knew my insecurities and he used me. In the end, I found that out. During that time, I was challenged regarding my parenting, my character, my resilience, while custody agreements and monetary arrangements ensued. Throughout my son's childhood, he was split between us. It was a constant battle of who was the better parent. I felt apologetic, not valued, and utterly stopped taking care of myself. I felt insecure about my parenting, and not to mention my son's teenage years and his angst in those teenage years. It all culminated to a head. I just let it go. My son went to live with his father. During that time, I worked on myself. I got involved in church. I attended soul care classes and even single parent family camp for years with my children. I attended therapy, started to accumulate my positives instead of my negatives, built mastery. For example, getting up, taking my medications on time, making time for breakfast, making time for those things that matter to me. Lastly, getting out of my emotional mind and paying attention more to my reasonable mind. For example, looking at the facts about the situation. Moving forward, this practice has helped me develop a better relationship with my son and my 2 other children. In conclusion, I let the outside world dysregulate me and internally for some years. Then I started tooting my own horn. I'm an educated brown woman who served in the armed forces with 3 beautiful children. I'm better emotionally and mentally than I was 12 years ago, and I see the effects in my children. Now my son, I can say, is 22 years old at this time, now serving full-time in the Army. Look at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sydney, and thank you for your service. Let's say that for sure. Our next speaker is Ross Mickley, and I'm gonna read everything Ross has written here because it's great. Okay. His story is about one man's search for home creates more questions than it answers. Is it countries, cities, houses, or our hearts where our homes lie? Great question. And then y'all gotta hear these nicknames, okay? Booster, King Diamond, and Kitchen Manager. Okay, so let's welcome, I'm gonna pick King Diamond. Let's welcome King Diamond, all right?
Maybe I can figure it out. I think it'll be all right. Testing. All right, thank you guys for being here. I was not born far from here, but I have traveled to distant lands. I have found homes in other places, and yet perhaps I've lost my idea of home along the way. Sometimes I wonder if I feel at home here in this country. Could I call myself an immigrant now, even in my own land? They say home is where the heart is, and shards of my heart lie all around at this point. The biggest piece of mine lies still in Japan, on the other side of the planet, in the peaceful mountainous forests. For my wife and I, leaving our home there was especially hard. A feudal lord's castle kept eternal watch over our city, standing proudly on a nearby mountaintop. It was accessible by Foothill Pass, but always visible no matter where you were. That castle granted me a feeling of ancient safety, which I became accustomed to. A feeling that I was a part of something, some purpose or tale larger than I could comprehend. In 2020, that safety was broken. We were told that our home was to be demolished. It was a traditional Japanese family house, modern circa the 1970s. The sliding doors to the inner patio were old and uneven, open to the air and insects at all times. I remember cleaning out the house before we left, musing about the spider webs as I swept them out for the last time. The webs were clumped like white cotton candy around the bases of wooden pillars in the kitchen. If I could be like the spiders, I thought, I could rebuild my home wherever I went. My home would always be with me. After all, I had swept away their homes dozens of times and it never stopped them from returning. I knew I shared no such strength with the spiders. That same year, a few months prior, my brother had taken his own life amidst the darkness of the pandemic. My parents moved to Florida, selling my ancestral home south of Pittsburgh. No matter how many homes we have, the first one always holds a special quality. It's a part of who we are. On our property, there was a pond we called a lake and a rope swing that soared over the water. Green trees and farmland surrounded us, while green, scratchy carpet and computer screens defined my dad's office in the basement. As it turned out, I was happier using Windows 98 downstairs than I was looking out an actual window upstairs. When I left America in 2017, I had that home. When I returned in 2020, it was someone else's. I would never again visit that place. Not long after my return, it seemed the whole country was going insane. There was rioting in the capital and no trust or truth to be found. What have I returned to, I thought? How can this country be my home now? What does home even mean when everything changes, when nothing is certain? I was a teacher while I traveled, and I'm a teacher here and now too. I'm still learning about teaching, and one thing I still ponder is the relative importance of my lessons throughout my career. To my mind, my first lessons were about little more than doing my best so I could get paid. Eventually, I saw the intrinsic value that teaching brought to others and to the world. Now, I just try to see my students for who they are and forget all the stories I have racing through my head about what should be happening in the classroom. I'm getting better, but I still feel I'm only scratching the surface of what it means to teach. I taught English abroad to children mostly, children who had parents who actively invested in their futures. You see, they saw English as a pathway to a better life, and so they paid their hard-earned money to bolster that hope. My lessons, full of song and silliness, were important, if not always to my students, to their parents. When I first returned to America, I taught unaccompanied minors, migrant kids, and teens from Central America. They were, by and large, forced across our border by their life circumstances, more so than by choice. There's always an element of choice. We can't rob anyone of that. But when choices are sufficiently limited by our environment, freedom is revealed to be hollow, an illusion we believe in only during times of peace. My students were travelers, just like me, but far less voluntary, far less lucky. They were committed, leaving themselves no possibility of a return to normalcy. Like my prior students, English was important for these immigrants and gave them strength. I envisioned myself as an ambassador, their gateway to America and to the English language. I would practice English with them for a short time before they were whisked away to new homes somewhere in the States. Sometimes they would stay longer, months, or better parts of a year at the shelter. If their case was held up or complicated, their futures were often uncertain. It was a safe place to be sure, but we half-jokingly called it a nice prison, not a place to stay too long. In those times, English stopped seeming important for my students. In those times, it was hard even for me to see the importance of such lessons. Learning is an exercise in hope then. When hope abounds, learning, that is, investing in your future, makes sense. But when despair prevails, learning becomes useless. Why invest in a future which does not seem to exist? Why seek to grow when your end seems assured? Most of my Central American students were betting on a better life in America. As it turns out, I made the same decision as them. But I still wonder, why did I bet on America as my home? Was it the land, my countrymen, my friends and family? How can I identify with something seemingly without basis, like being American? I'm lucky truly to be able to choose this country. Most are not so lucky as I. The fact that I was free to choose this country as my home may be the most American thing about me, but that gift of freedom can also be a curse, as we know well. After seeing the ways of Europe and Asia, America seems so disconnected from the past, so eager to progress without considering what direction to travel in. Growth in any direction is not necessarily good. There must always be signposts, where we've come from and where we're trying to go. What in the idea of America spoke to me? I can stand for freedom, but it's hard to fight for that ideal in this moment. Our nation seems tied to freedom worship in some kind of ever-sickening death spiral. It's not freedom, but community that we need, that I need. They say home is where the heart is, but what if we really find our homes in the hearts of others? In that way, maybe we can find the strength of the spiders, rebuilding our homes no matter where we live through relationships and connection. Around Christmas in 2021, 16 Afghan boys dropped into the shelter, into my English class, and into my life. The US had screwed up another region of the world, and these boys were forced to come here for their safety. Involuntary immigrants, darkened by the sorrows of that trauma, but not hopeless. They brought with them an inner strength, and through challenging times, called upon God as their home. When I traveled with them to worship, I felt the power which brotherhood, culture, and tradition brought to them. They were so far from family, but seemed so at home there in the Islamic Community Center, chanting in unison, their feet bare and freshly washed, kneeling on the plush and patterned carpets, surrounded by the extended family of their faith, surrounded by their community. I wondered why I felt so intrigued by their cultural habits, but was so devoid of cultural habits myself. My nation and my kind are individualistic to the extreme. Culture to me is just a plaything, only a means to the end of my own satisfaction. The vibrations of culture never resonated within me, never became part of my identity. My type, we don't grow from the tree, we fall from it. Like fruit that splits open on the forest floor. We just have to hope the seed is strong enough to endure as it sinks into the darkness of the earth. Hope that it erupts with vital force just as the shell cracks under the pressure of the world above. America is like that, and I'm like that too, trying to be something new. Although I understood almost nothing of what I saw in the Muslim community centers, I felt always at home there, strangely more so than I remembered feeling in my church as a kid. One of my students told me, "You go to mosque 10 times, you Muslim." While I desperately wanted the strength of that brotherhood, granted even in jest, I only visited 6 times. More Afghans came, and despite their struggles, despite their travels being completely involuntary, they always found hope. How did I know? Eventually, more often than not, they found value in their studies at the shelter, and then they left, flying to new homes across America. Now I teach American students. And if I thought the crisis at the southern border or the war in Afghanistan were bad, seeing the dysfunction right here in Pittsburgh schools hits me hard. My students are fighting, my students are killing, my students are dying. I want to be responsible and to help, but the problems might be more than I can take on. Is it a lack of hope? Is it infecting us all? Some of my students are lucky to have parents who have hopeful futures. Hope is contagious, you see, and children get it from their kin, if they are lucky enough to have kin. I want them to get hope from me, but just like hope, despair can be contagious too. Do my students feel like me, I wonder, immigrants in their own homeland, on the fringes, societally mute and out of place? Did any of us ever have a choice but to be a part of this system? Our schools, our government, our corporations, a seamless system of American nonsense, a system which does not honor our uniqueness and yet provides no grand order or purpose for us to seek. Is this system built for our people? If not, what is it built for? And what does it stand for? Freedom or something else? It's hard for me to find hope in the big picture, although it always abounds in the small. I chose to be here, and so I feel little right to whine about that choice. All I can do is make this place my home. I don't say this with a sense of resignation at all, but with complete knowledge that our problems can be fixed and that there is a light to be followed. We may be in the dark, but there is a light on the horizon. I don't know what it is, but I know that it's there. I want to lead my students there with me, even as I struggle to find the way. I think that light has a lot to do with learning. If we can learn about our world, learn from one another, and learn about ourselves, we will never occupy ourselves with violence, hatred, or fear. And while I'm a math teacher now, it seems my lessons have a different meaning to me. I don't believe math is going to save us. So I teach hope. My hope for home, my hope for America, my hope for Pittsburgh, and my hope for my students, that they someday choose this home for themselves, like I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Russ. Or should I say King? Are there other teachers in the room? Are there other teachers in the room? Look around. Look around. I want y'all to connect with each other, right? Because you're part of a vital club. Sometimes it feels like a fighting club, right? You're on the front lines and you need to know each other exists. Our last storyteller this evening is Simone Arnold. Fun fact, Simone wants us to know that her mom is a storyteller and a coach, but not her coach, all right? This is a story about how you can transition from one type of person to another. And the nicknames we have here are Moni and Momo. So come on down here, Momo. The mic is yours.
tell you all my other nicknames. Some people watching might know them. Can you hear me? Because
We need you in the mic.
you need me in the mic? All right. We're going to try to stay in the mic, but I talk and move. So here we go. So the fans are extra loud and hyped up today. The night air is crisp. The lights are bright. First down. You watch the quarterback mouth something. The players on the field start to move. There's a collective gasp. And then touchdown. People are jumping up and down, waving these yellow towels. Someone that has probably had a little bit too much spiked lemonade walks past me and puts his hand up to give me a high five. Thinking, do I have to deal with them later in some capacity because of what they're doing right now? Nah, they're not that tipsy. They'll be fine by the third quarter. My smirk and internal giggle and watching everyone is interrupted by hearing my name in the earpiece. Simone, can you go to section 131 and meet a guest who has a complaint about someone sitting around them? Copy. I say as I walk toward that direction. I'm formulating a game plan in my head. I'm thinking of typical scenarios. What could it be now? Is the person in front of them standing too much? Is someone behind them cursing? Is someone behind them secretly vaping? Or are they smoking marijuana? I have solutions for all of these because I've dealt with them for 1,000 times. I have them all up here. As I approach the guest, I see his face. And I'm like, oh, this might be a tricky one, but I can handle it because fake it till you make it, right? I bet you're wondering, how did I get here? And to be honest, I'm still wondering too. If you ask anyone who knew me in 2001, they would have told you that I'm a textbook introvert. I tend to focus more on inner experiences, my own feelings and thoughts, more than anything outer. I'm guarded and I'm socially anxious, and I prefer spending time alone. And if you were here before, you would know that I'm Carla's only child, and that's why. In early spring 2001, I saw a job ad for a job fair at Civic Arena, it's gone now, for a new football stadium that was being built. And I thought, I could use some extra money. Let me go check it out. I mean, I like football. I could see some extra games for free, right? I get there, I sit down, and I find this bright-eyed and bushy-tailed lady named C. We begin to talk. She tells me about all the jobs, all the experiences that I can have, but she tells me she wants me to come work with her in guest services. I look at her and I giggle because in the back of my mind, I know I am not a people person, but I throw caution to the wind because, sure, the summer of 2001 comes. We take a stadium tour. We go through various customer service trainings, and we're gearing up for the big day, the opening day. And then 9/11 happens. We're delayed a couple weeks. They're figuring out new security measures. They're giving the teams time to get themselves back together, their travel arrangements back together, and we start to return to play. A few weeks go by, and we have opening day. There are people everywhere, and they're asking all kinds of questions. Some I have the answers to, some I don't. Person after person, I can feel myself becoming overstimulated because, people. I have to talk. I have to talk to people. I have to smile. I just can't people. I think to myself, I wanted extra money. Do I really want to do this? One game turned into two. Two turned into four. I told myself I was only going to do this for 1 year because I'm not a people person. And it's only a part-time job to make extra money, right? 4 games turned into an entire season, 2 seasons, 4 seasons. But I noticed that it's getting a little bit easier to talk to people. And instead of having to have people come to me, I can go to them. I was able to ask them, if they look confused or if they looked like they were trying to figure out something, I can walk up to them and ask them if they needed help. Most are sports lovers like I am. They love their city, they love their team. I smiled more. I laughed more. I was loud, as you can see. I became more extroverted in social situations outside of the stadium. I noticed that my interactions with people became more genuine, and I became more of an open book. 4 seasons became 10 seasons. And at the end of every season, I said that was my last season. I was quitting because people do too much. They're the most, and they complain about everything. But secretly, I was addicted. I was addicted to meeting new people. I was addicted to learning new ways of interacting with people. I became obsessed. 10 seasons became 15 seasons. Next thing I know, it's 2023. 22 years later. Do I still consider myself an introvert? Yup. Because I still value my alone time. I'm still very observant. I'm very introspective. And I'm still somewhat shy, believe it or not. However, I label myself as an introverted extrovert. I've learned how to turn it on and turn it off. It actually helped me get my real job that I'll soon be celebrating my 19th year at. It helped me become a better leader, a manager, and actually this year, an AVP. So when you meet the Simone of 2023, you're meeting a totally different Simone from the one in 2001. She'll smile at you in a heartbeat. She'll sometimes talk your ear off if you let her. Because fake it till you make it, right? Thank you.
As a fellow introverted extrovert, I really resonate with that. All right, thank you so much. Hey, friends, let's take a couple minutes as we finish here to, first of all, say thanks to our storytellers again. Can we do that? Secondly, I would like us to thank our story coaches. I'm not exactly sure who they all are. I see two. Okay, Carla and Kay Bay, right? So thank you, story coaches. And lastly, I think we should thank the brain trust of this iteration of Storyburg, the demilitarized zone, and that is the combination of Will and Pam. And so thanks, both of you. Mark your calendars. Mark your calendars for January 25th. You'll get something in your email. We got a few backup dates in case Pittsburgh does what Pittsburgh does, right? Also, mark your calendars if this next Storyburg, next demilitarized zone is your turn to tell a story. Today's a great day to talk to any of the storytellers, the coaches, Will and Pam, about what it means to tell a story. Who else here has told a story? Margot, Carla. So please talk to our storytellers to find out what the experience is like. Don't be afraid. Step forward. The world needs to hear what you have to say. Thank you for giving your time today, for connecting your heart to other humans. Let's take this connection out there and create more spaces where we are demilitarized and connected, right? Thanks. Have a good night, friends.